Today we're stepping back into a storm so powerful, so sudden, and so devastating that its shadow still lies over an entire coastline. A night when the wind rose, the water followed, and an American city was nearly erased in the span of a few hours. On September 8, 1900, a Category 4 hurricane slammed into Galveston Island, killing an estimated 8,000 to 12,000 people before dawn. No other natural disaster in United States history has claimed more lives. The storm surge, somewhere between 8 and 15 feet, swallowed the island whole. More than 3,600 homes were torn apart. Whole districts were reduced to tangled debris. In some places, every member of a household died, leaving no one alive to speak their name or identify their bodies.
In the days that followed, the dead were so numerous that the city first attempted to commit them to the sea, but the tide returned them to shore. With no other option, Galveston turned to mass cremation. Funeral pyres burned across the island for weeks. Others were laid to rest in unmarked mass graves that still lie beneath the modern city. The emotional toll was immeasurable. Every survivor lost someone, a neighbor, a friend, a family member. The grief was communal, suffocating, and for many impossible to fully resolve. Galveston rebuilt, but the memory of that night never truly left.
More than a century later, many in Galveston will tell you the storm never truly passed. Its shadow lingers in the places where the destruction was absolute, in the homes rebuilt over unmarked graves, along the shoreline where bodies once returned with the tide, and in the districts where witnesses still report apparitions, footsteps, and voices tied directly to that night. The hurricane that struck Galveston Island on September 8, 1900, is believed to have reached the strength of a Category 4 storm on the modern Saffir-Simpson scale, with the sustained winds near 145 miles per hour. No anemometer survived the impact, so the exact wind speeds will never be known. What is certain is that the storm was powerful enough to obliterate nearly everything standing. But it was the storm's surge that delivered the true devastation. Water rose 8 to 15 feet above normal tide levels, and Galveston's highest natural elevation was only 8.7 feet. By the evening of September 8th, the island had vanished beneath the gulf. There was no high ground, no refuge, no path to safety. The sea simply rose and kept rising until the city was gone. Galveston had almost no meaningful warning. The U.S. Weather Bureau, led by Willis Moore, dismissed the analysis coming from Cuban meteorologists who had been tracking the storm's movement across the Caribbean. On the island itself, Isaac Klein, the Bureau's chief meteorologist, did what he could. On the morning of September 8th, he rode along the shoreline on horseback, urging residents to seek higher ground.
But the danger escalated far faster than anyone expected. By midday, the storm had already severed Galveston's connection to the mainland. The bridges were destroyed, cutting off every escape route. As the water rose, the entire population became trapped on the island with no way out, and no time left to flee. More than 3,600 homes were obliterated. As the storm advanced, it drove a massive wall of debris, shattered lumber, brick, iron, and human bodies across the island with the force of a moving fortress. Entire blocks vanished. The commercial center along the Strand suffered catastrophic damage, and buildings that had anchored Galveston's economy were gutted or swept away. Churches, schools, hospitals, and the grand homes of the city's elite were torn apart just as easily as the modest cottages near the docks. The destruction spared no one. Mansions on Broadway Avenue fell alongside the workers' shanties at the waterfront. Businesses, fishing shacks, and family homes were reduced to the same indistinguishable wreckage. The storm made no distinctions, and neither did the death it brought. The loss of life, estimated between 8,000 and 12,000 people, can never be calculated with certainty. The storm erased the very records that might have provided answers. Entire families died with no survivors left to report them missing. Property deeds and birth certificates, municipal documents, they were all washed away or destroyed. Many victims were immigrants, dock workers, laborers, and their families, whose names had never been formally entered into city rolls. In the aftermath, the death outnumbered the living, and countless identities were lost forever.
The deaths occurred primarily during the evening and night of September 8th. As the storm surge rose, people took shelter in the strongest buildings they could find. When those buildings collapsed or were overwhelmed by the water, the occupants drowned, were crushed by debris, or were swept out to sea. Some survived by clinging to floating wreckage for hours in the dark, battered by wind and waves, watching others drown around them. The scenes that greeted survivors at dawn, September 9th, were beyond comprehension. Bodies were everywhere, tangled in debris, floating in receding floodwaters, half buried in sand and wreckage. The dead included infants, elderly residents, entire households. In some neighborhoods, there were more dead than living. The smell of decomposition began almost immediately in the September heat. Survivor testimonies printed in newspapers across the country in the days and weeks after the storm captured a level of grief that still feels unbearable more than a century later. Fathers combed through piles of wreckage searching for their children. Mothers learned that every member of their family had drowned in the house next door. Neighbors identified the bodies of people they had spoken to only hours before the wind rose and the water came. The hurricane killed more people than any other natural disaster in United States history. By comparison, Hurricane Katrina in 2005 killed approximately 1,800 people. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake killed an estimated 3,000. The Galveston storm's death toll exceeds both of those disasters combined, and it occurred on a single barrier island on the Texas Gulf Coast in a single night.
The greatest single loss of life occurred at St. Mary's Orphanage, run by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word. The orphanage's two beachfront buildings, set on the western end of Galveston Island, housed 93 children, from infants to young teens. As the storm intensified on the afternoon of September 8th, the 10 sisters caring for them realized the structures would not withstand the rising water. In a final effort to protect the children, they used clothesline rope to tie groups of 6 to 8 children to each nun, hoping that if the buildings collapsed, the children would at least remain with an adult. Can you imagine being one of those nuns?
Yeah.
Like, there's only 10 of them, but there's
Right.
90 children?
Yeah. Right.
That would be devastating, scary.
Right. I think that's hard. They had to, I don't know. I'm sure there was hope, but they had to really know how that was going to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you couldn't not do nothing. And
No,
you had to do
absolutely. I mean,
something.
they did what they probably all that they could do, but that is
Yeah.
still, man. And infants too. And it's not just kids that can walk on their own, but fucking infants too.
Yeah. They didn't want to lose a single one of them.
That's nuts. The storm surge struck with overwhelming force. Both buildings gave way. 90 of the 93 children died, along with all 10 sisters. Only 3 boys, William Murney, Frank Madera, and Albert Campbell, survived after the ropes binding them to their caretaker snapped, allowing them to cling to an uprooted tree that carried them through the storm until they washed ashore on the mainland. The only way they survived was going further into the storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the days that followed, recovery crews found the bodies of the sisters still bound to the children they had refused to abandon. That image, women who chose to tie their fate to the children rather than save themselves, became one of the most enduring and heartbreaking stories of the hurricane. St. Mary's Orphanage was never rebuilt. The beachfront site near the western end of today's seawall bears no formal marker equal to the scale of the tragedy, but the story has never faded from Galveston's memory. The sheer number of dead after the hurricane created a crisis the city had no way to manage. Galveston's resources were exhausted almost immediately, and the need for rapid disposal meant that thousands of victims were never given individual graves or proper rites. Because of this, parts of modern Galveston stand directly above unmarked burial sites. Construction crews have occasionally uncovered human remains, a stark reminder that the dead of 1900 are still beneath the city's foundations.
My brother used to live in Galveston, and I remember my mom going to visit him, and my mom isn't one that has I would say she isn't one that regularly is in touch with the types of things that you and I do on this podcast, apparitions and ghosts
Hmm.
and seeing things and hearing things. That's just not something that has happened to her very many times in her life, and she's pretty glad about that.
Sure, yeah.
But she did say when she went to visit my brother, he was already aware of it, but she happened to experience it while she was there. There was a little boy apparition that would be seen in his apartment, and she actually caught glimpse of him. And whenever I was looking into this stuff, I remembered that story from my mom, and I wondered if he was part of the 90, you know,
Hmm.
or just any other family, really. I don't know where the apartment was, but, I don't know if you've ever been to Galveston.
Mm-mm. Nope.
But yeah, it was interesting reading all that stuff and then thinking of that. Have you ever been coastal, like on the coast, the Gulf Coast in particular?
No. I
Okay.
mean, the closest I've been to the ocean would be uh, the U.S. Virgin Islands and Georgia.
It's really eerie whenever you are on the coast, when you are on the beach or within a mile or two of the beach, and there is a hurricane in the Gulf. It doesn't even have to be super close yet,
Hmm.
but it's kind of a eerie feeling. You won't even necessarily see the sky dark or clouds or anything like that yet, but the water is different. It's in the Gulf. It's murkier. It's dirtier. It's definitely choppy. The air is different. It just feels charged. You notice things with the wildlife. There's the like the last time I was in the like the beach area. I was in oh, where was that? It was just west of Galveston. I can't think of the beach now, but there was a hurricane that was near, I think it was near Louisiana at the time. And it was really choppy. And the gators from the swamp areas from way over there were showing up in the surf on the beach. And I know that it happens. You just don't see them all too frequently. But when there's a hurricane in the Gulf, you do see them a lot more. But it wasn't threatening where I was, but it still was a really eerie feeling. And I remember every time the tide would come in, if the vehicle was on the beach, I wanted off the beach really quick
Hmm.
because it just felt like the tide was coming in so much faster. It was just pushing in a lot further than it usually did. Um, I don't know,
Would you say it's an
but
ominous feeling?
it is very ominous, and
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it is because you know that that's so close to you, whether you know it's going to hit you or not.
Sure.
But but for me, and maybe not everyone is like that, but I think for people that are sensitive to things like that, I think whether you knew there was a storm coming or not, you would still have that ominous feeling. I mean, you get tornadoes where you are. It's like, you can step out on your porch in the morning and go, oh, somebody's getting a tornado today. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can
Mm-hmm.
feel it in the
Yeah,
air. And then you're not
absolutely.
wishing it, you're not hoping it to happen. But, the barometric pressure, that barometric pressure is a real thing. It's science, and it does affect how our bodies feel. And some people are more aware of that than other people. Um, but yeah, some people are more in tune to that, and you can step outside and go, oh, okay, I
Right.
need to watch the weather today.
Well, and that
Um,
was always the funny thing is like off track, but like it was always something where you it was always something I said to people, including my ex-wife, but you walk outside and you're like, it's gonna rain later today.
yeah,
And it's like, 6 o'clock in the morning. They're like, it's sunny out today. And it's like, but you go and it ends up raining. Even if it's a brief rain,
yeah.
it's gonna rain. And they're like, how'd you even know that? You bet you looked at the weather app. It's like, no, you can feel that. And it's weird, but you can feel that.
It's always funny to me. I think about this one thing. When I was a teenager, and I was hanging out outside at the apartments that I lived at, and I was laying next to the pool, and it was humid, and there was rings around the moon because of the humidity in the
Mm-hmm.
atmosphere. And the the people I was hanging out with, one of the guys, we were all laying there on our backs looking up, and he said, "Old people will be like, you see that there ring around the moon? That means it's gonna rain." And every time I talk about weather stuff, I always think about that. And I remember listening to him say that, and I was like, well, not just old people, because I knew exactly what I knew what it
Right,
meant.
yeah.
But he's not wrong either.
I
Um,
mean, people just need to read a bit of a farmer's almanac and they'll understand a bit more about the
right.
signs.
Well, if you think about it, my generation, and if you're from this South in particular, in this area, there's a lot of grain farmers in Louisiana. There's a lot of sugar cane. It just depends on where you're at. But
Mm-hmm.
when, like, my generation, our parents most likely lived on a farm, and their parents most likely definitely lived on a farm. So
Mm-hmm.
of course they're going to recognize these signs in the atmosphere. They're going to be very aware of it because they need to be, because
Mm-hmm.
it's attached to their livelihood. You know, um,
Absolutely.
when you're planting, when you're sowing, when you're reaping, when all of those things, and whether you're going to have a good harvest or not. So I don't know. It's just kind of funny. That was a really
Yeah.
long rabbit trail. I hope
I
everyone
mean,
enjoyed it.
and that's why I said, if they read a farmer's almanac, they'll
Hmm.
get more of it because it's the
Right.
same thing. Like even if it's a cattle farm,
Hmm.
bovine, they're still paying attention to the weather because they can't be letting their animals run around out in the bad weather and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, certain weather is going to make the heifer's calf. You know,
Oh,
they're gonna
absolutely.
they're gonna start having their babies with certain weather, and if you aren't aware of that, then you run risk of those calves becoming victim to predators.
Hmm.
So you kind of need to keep an eye out. Okay, yeah, she had her calf or whatever. Because you don't want something coming in and taking the calf.
Right.
So you just it's not like you've got to go build a fence around it or anything, but you just need to be aware of
Yeah.
these things. So
So realistically, pay attention to the world around you, and you'll see these signs. Simple as that.
right, yeah, I think anymore, sadly, they would just call these the old ways. and a lot of
Mm,
people have forgotten the old ways.
I mean, you and I gotta admit that it is the old ways.
It is. And the stuff I listened to in high school is like on the oldie station now.
I know. I
So,
ever have that conversation with you about people like there's somebody that came up to me and was like, System of a Down is classic rock. I was like, no, it fucking isn't.
shut your mouth.
Like classic rock is Led Zeppelin, bitch.
Exactly.
But no, they're
Exactly.
like Godsmack and System of a Down. It's like, dude, chill the fuck out.
Right. Across cultures, the treatment of the dead is understood as essential to spiritual rest, whether through burial, ceremonial cremation, or other sacred practices. Communities rely on ritual to guide the dead from the world of the living. When those rites are disrupted or denied, the resulting folklore is strikingly consistent. The dead linger. The 1900 hurricane created those conditions on an unprecedented scale. Thousands of bodies were burned on open air pyres without names, prayers, or ceremony. Thousands more were cast into the Gulf without funeral rites. Others were placed in mass trenches and later buried again under 17 feet of fill sand during the city's grade raising project. Galveston's deeply religious Victorian community believed these rites were sacred, and the storm made them impossible. This is not a supernatural claim, it is a cultural truth. When the community suffers mass death followed by improper burial, grief becomes entangled with guilt and spiritual unease. The stories that emerge: apparitions near mass graves, voices heard where bodies were stored, presence felt in buildings tied to the dead, follow patterns documented in every society that has endured similar trauma. Galveston's haunted sites fit this pattern with precision. Old City Cemetery, Broadway Cemetery, and other burial grounds tied to storm victims have long histories of reported activity: orbs, shadow figures, sudden drops in temperature, and disembodied voices. The Strand district, rebuilt over the ruins of the commercial center, has generated decades of accounts. Apparitions in upper windows, unexplained sounds during storms, and a heaviness visitors describe again and again.
The ghost stories connected to the 1900 hurricane cluster around specific locations, and the reports have remained consistent for more than a century. Bishop's Palace, the grand Victorian home built by Colonel Walter Gresham, survived the storm and sheltered hundreds as the water rose. People crowded into the upper floors where the living, the injured, and the dying shared the same rooms. Today, visitors describe cold spots in the hallways, footsteps in empty rooms, fleeting shadow figures, and the apparition of a man in Victorian clothing believed to be Gresham. Moody Mansion, home to one of Galveston's wealthiest families, also endured the storm. Its long and sometimes tragic family history has produced reports of doors opening on their own, objects shifting from their places, and voices in rooms known to be empty. The Tremont House Hotel, destroyed in the hurricane and later rebuilt, is one of the Strand's most frequently reported haunted sites. Guests have described waterlogged footprints appearing in dry corridors, the scent of seawater in interior rooms, and brief sightings of figures in period clothing who vanish when approached. And throughout the Strand district, where the storm inflicted catastrophic damage, rebuilt structures have produced generations of reports. Unexplained noises during storms, figures in upper windows, and an atmosphere that many visitors describe as heavy, charged, or watchful. Galveston cemeteries, Old City Cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery, and others, where storm victims were laid to rest, remain centers of persistent activity. Orbs, shadows, sudden cold spots, and voices carried on still air. The 1900 hurricane isn't merely a chapter in Galveston's past, it is the event that split the city's identity in two. Before the storm, Galveston was the wealthiest city in Texas, a major American port with global reach. Afterward, it was a shattered island that would never reclaim its former prominence. In Galveston's historical timeline, the hurricane is the fault line. Everything is measured as before or after that night. And this is why the storm saturates Galveston's ghost lore. No other single event claimed as many lives, and none inflicted trauma on such a universal scale. Every family, every district, every institution bore its mark. The physical reminders remain embedded in the city's bones. The seawall raised in its wake, the elevated grade that reshaped the island, the surviving mansions revered precisely because they endured, and the cemeteries that still hold its dead.
So, when residents or visitors describe something uncanny, the hurricane becomes the most immediate and emotionally charged explanation. A sudden chill in Bishop's Palace is linked to storm refugees. A child's disembodied voice near the shoreline is tied to St. Mary's Orphanage. The scent of seawater drifting through the Tremont house evokes the surge that swallowed the island. The storm carved itself into Galveston's spiritual terrain just as deeply as it altered the physical one. And just as the modern city stands atop the unmarked graves of those lost, its ghost stories rise from the foundation laid on September 8, 1900, a night the island has never fully escaped. As we step back from the shadows of Galveston's past, I want to leave you with this. History doesn't disappear. It lingers, it settles into the wood grain of old houses, into the salt air rolling off the Gulf, into the stories we inherit and the ones we choose to tell. The 1900 storm may have reshaped the island's shoreline, but it also reshaped its spirit, and that spirit still murmurs if you know how to listen. Every ghost story, every strange whisper in a hallway, every cold breath of air in a place that shouldn't be cold. It all traces back to that night when the world changed. And in telling these stories, we're not just remembering the dead, we're acknowledging the living imprint they left behind. If today's journey stirred something in you, a memory, a question, a theory, or even your own brush with the unexplained, I'd love to hear it. Your stories are part of this tapestry too. Share them with us, reach out on our website, leave a comment, send us a message, or join the conversation with other listeners who feel that same pull toward the strange and the storied. And if you haven't already, make sure you follow the show so you don't miss the next descent into the places where history and hauntings overlap. Your support, your curiosity, your voice, that's what keeps this circle of storytelling alive. Until next time, keep your senses open, keep your mind steady, and remember, the past is never as far away as we think.